MBA Beyond Ask Me Anything session. I'm Paridhi, co-founder of MBA Beyond, and we do this week on week to, of course, facilitate strong and meaningful conversations between alums, students of top business schools, and candidates who are trying to apply to some of the top business schools. While we have spoken to some of you, and I'm personally aware of how strong your candidacies are, and we've got two amazing speakers with us today who are going to, of course, help you answer the most pressing questions on your MBA journey. While I understand that some of you might be a little late for round one, we're still offering round one if you still have 25 days left for your application deadline for one school. We are happy to have you on board with us for that. Otherwise, we are hoping that most of the candidates here we have today are targeting round two. So any questions about round one versus round two, we are happy to answer, and anything around the number of schools that you can target for round two, considering that you start your journey now, we are happy to answer that. For round two, just before we start and while people are joining in, we are still offering one free school because if you're going to be signing up for 5 schools or more, the idea behind that is we actually want to push candidates to start their journey early, since we've seen candidates who actually spend on an average 25 to 30 days per application on their MBA application, they have a higher chances of success. We've got 2 amazing speakers with us tonight, and I'm going to, of course, innovate until we have more people joining in. Krishnendu, I'm going to hold you a little bit longer. Till then, we are going to just get to know our audience a little better. So I'm sharing my screen. Going to be running a little poll just to understand you better. What do you think is the most fun part of an MBA application journey? It's just coming up. You can either scan it with your phone, but if you're connected from your phone, you can key in the code that's going to show up on the screen in a bit. Yes, and the code is going to be on, go to slido.com, and if you will key in 1981973, so let the word cloud pop up. It's going to be an interesting insight into what do you guys think about MBA application? What's the fun part? I always try to do the other way around, like trying to ask the most challenging part, but I was like, okay, let's flip the question this time. Try to get to know you better. And while we're at it, guys, you are welcome to go on camera because it's a very small session. It's like small group of people. We like to see faces. Otherwise, it's just Krishnendu, me, and Buddy looking at each other. we want to get to know you as well. Also, potential people who are going to be working with MBA Beyond later, and are going to be our future applicants, future profile experts, and future consultants. We are really looking forward to see your faces. While the first, oh, nice, better self-awareness. That's interesting. Okay. And we are getting to know you better as we do that. How the session is going to go, we're going to touch upon 2-3 pressing questions with the speakers to begin with. We'll touch upon that in the first 20 to 25 minutes. And in the later half of the session, we want to answer all the questions that you guys have. We may not be able to touch upon all the questions if there are too many. However, we'll try to address as many as possible. You guys are free to drop in your questions in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hands, and we are welcoming you to unmute yourself and share your question vocally, verbally as well. We are happy to answer your questions. While we're at it, I think we can start with a little round of introductions, and I'd like to say that we've got 2 speakers from 2 really cool schools out there in Europe. EASA, which is IESE. I know not many of us know how to pronounce it, but it's pronounced IESA, and INSEAD. So Krishnendu, please go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience about your background, the industry you're coming from, and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paridhi. Hi, everyone. Nice meeting you here. I'm Krishnendu. I know for Indians it's not a complex name, but I've changed to Krish of late. But Krish really wasn't a helpful movie either, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there. I am, obviously from India, but I grew up in the Middle East for most of my life. Grew up in Saudi Arabia, moved down to India to my undergraduate, and then spent about 6 years working as a data science consultant. Worked largely with clients in the retail, consumer goods, and healthcare sector. after about 6 years, I decided to do the MBA. Decided to do it from ESA Business School. Packed my bags in the middle of COVID. But an amazing bunch of 19 months, I must say. Loved the city, loved every single bit of the MBA program. Uh, and I just graduated about 2 months ago. So it's been amazing overall. I interned with a consulting firm at the London office last summer. And I'll be heading back there full time by the end of the year as well. So that's a bit about me. Outside of work, I am really into traveling. I try to do every single bit that I can. I've been to about, I think, 17 or 18 countries at this point. I'm planning to hit 20 by the end of the year. I have a bike, so I go around on my bike quite a bit. I am a self-trained guitarist as well. And I am also really into gardening. I think it really keeps me calm. That's a bit about me.
That's amazing. Congratulations, Krishnendu. So when are you
Thank you.
already have you already started working, or you still have a few months to go before you start?
I have a few more months. So I'm in India right now. I need to figure out my visa. Hopefully by November, December, I'll be moving to the UK. And that's the plan.
Nice. Super excited for you. And
Thank
was it
you.
like a difficult journey looking at the work? Because people have a lot of questions around recession and how it will hit you hard when you're going to try and look for jobs after you graduate. So we're going to touch upon that a little bit as well. I've received a bunch of questions, and I would be very interested in understanding how did you tackle the situation and how did you land yourself into a safe space with a soft landing into a job that's in UK, which is like a great.
That's a loaded question, Paradi. But in all honesty, I think the year that I went in was maybe one of the luckier batches, just because I think there was a post-COVID boom.
Yeah.
Hiring was through the roof. So definitely there was a bit of benefit in that sense. But I think when it comes to recruiting in Europe, it's a couple of factors, right? Knowing what sector you want to go to, knowing what your constraints are, networking really well with the offices of the firms that you really want to, making sure you really know what kind of office and practice you want to be following and how you narrate your story for that. I think if you do those baseline checks done, you have a good chance. I think things are a bit more trickier maybe as we speak, but I think by 24 things are hoping to change quite a bit as well, right? I think there are already the good signs coming through in the hiring market. I think last year was a bit dull, but things are changing much better right now, so the things looking bright.
All right. Thanks for that information. I'm sure it's super helpful for everybody
Yeah.
sitting around here waiting on to get more insights from you. So guys, just to add on, Krish is also our profile expert. Our profile experts are genuine people who've landed themselves into some of the top business schools or graduated from there, and they want to give back to the community by doing a very interesting something that you guys all go out in the market asking for. How good do you think my profile is for a certain school, XYZ school? And we really want that value to be coming from the candidates who've actually done it all themselves by themselves, and they know the schools in and out. So Krishnendu is somebody who can really guide you, help you. If you've not done a profile expert call yet, we are happy to welcome you to potentially have a call. I'll be sending out an email after this. So if you want to have a conversation with Krishnendu, we're happy to have you put him, be in touch with him and take it forward from there. Our second speaker today is Buddy. He's just made it to INSEAD, and now I'm going to just hand over the mic to Buddy. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Badi. I'm from Ireland, but originally Libyan, hence the name. So a bit about my background. I did my undergrad here in Dublin in actuarial science. And then I realized I didn't want to become an actuary, but I kind of liked numbers. So I pivoted two different roles. I was first a couple of years in FP&A in a firm in Canada. Did that for 2.5 years. Then I completed my CFA exams. And now currently I'm working as an equity analyst for Fidelity International, the asset management firm. And yeah, I decided to do an MBA. It was always a thought in the back of my head, but I finally decided to, pull the trigger and, start my applications around November of last year. So again, I was targeting round one applications for INSEAD. And yeah, thankfully I got in. So I'll be starting in January. So I'm still in Ireland, still working away, doing all the preparations in the meantime. And yeah, excited to answer any questions that you guys might have as someone who's just recently gone through the entire process, the good and the bad.
So excited for you, buddy, and congratulations.
Thank
And we
you.
got the news that Buddy made it through. And I remember my conversation with you the other day. I was like, wow, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, so this is, I'm sure it has been one hell of a ride, but how do you feel? Like, how did you feel when you got an admit? And what was the first thing that you did just out of, like just to make it a little on a lighter note, candid conversation here before we go a little more serious?
Yeah. It was honestly just relief, between preparing for the GMAT and the applying to schools and the essays and the interviews and the worry and the stress, like, are you good enough? Are you going to get in? Are you not going to get in? So I remember when the invites started rolling around, I got the call from France, and my heart dropped, and they told me, thankfully, that I got in. Yeah, it was a huge, huge relief.
Great. That's really good to know. Okay, while I see what I see on the screen, this is very interesting. And I think we'll try to connect the dots too, because I see introspection too many times. And I believe that is genuinely something that resonates with me. And I'm sure it resonates with you and Buddy as well, because an MBA application journey really takes you on a ride when you go within. And you want to try to answer a lot of questions with a lot of whys. And then, why do you want to do an MBA? Why do you want to do it from a certain school? Why do you have a certain post-MBA goal? How should you position yourself? So I think that kind of introspection really leads you to all the answers, which eventually make up your stories. And that is also a framework that MBA Beyond, of course, follows, which we are going to touch upon, of course, later. But let's get on to the questions that candidates ask us the most. While we're at it, guys, feel free to drop in your questions in the chat. We're going to take it in another 15 to 20 minutes. Or you can raise your hands and we're welcoming you to unmute yourself. So to both of you, why did you pick EASA and INSEAD respectively? And anybody can go first as your choice of school to join for your MBA.
I can start. So for me, it was, I think, actually a bunch of different factors. I think the first thing was in terms of, I think, general student feedback and alumni review. The school really stood out. I think almost everyone that I spoke to had really good reviews. So it seemed like everyone was happy with the program. It was also one of the first schools where I saw people actually rave a bit about academics. And I was like, that's a bit weird. That's not what I'm going into an MBA for. Why is that the standout factor? And maybe that's not the expectation, but turns out, ESA does very well in terms of academics just because we're one of the schools that heavily focuses on a case method sort of teaching system. So there's a lot of learning that happens by virtue of being in the class itself. Second is, I think for me personally, I lived in India and the Middle East, worked with clients in the US and APAC. I had very little exposure into Europe. I'd never stepped foot inside Europe, and I was looking particularly at schools in Europe. And this was a way to make that happen. And ESA had a pretty good alumni network in the region, especially in the sectors that I was focusing, which was largely consulting and tech. So there was a good fit there. And I think largely in general, like I said, in terms of the kind of people that I met at the school, they were really happy with what the program was able to do for them in the short term. I met with a few alums as well. They were super happy with what career outcomes it was able to develop for them. And yeah, it made sense from that sense. And most importantly, I think, which was the distinguishing factor for me, was I wanted a 2-year program, simply because I knew I wasn't the candidate who would be able to figure out in a short span of time. Some people are able to, from an academic and a recruitment perspective, right? Academic, because I don't come from business. I come from data and technology. I'm very numbers driven. That's my strength, but I don't understand finance. I don't understand accounting. I needed the extra time. I also wanted the extra time to do an internship, see what things pan out, and then, recruit full time as well. So that made sense as well. A 19-month program makes sense. It's a combination of those factors which made ESA really stand out.
That's amazing. And that's a lot of, I'm sure, like, that's a lot of conviction. That's like, while you're speaking about it, that you might have done a lot of research on a lot of schools before you actually decided or logged in, or you shortlisted a few schools. So Krishnendu, just a follow-up question on that. How much early, like prior to the actual deadline, did you really start the research or the actual work? And I mean, it could be months, years, I don't know, or weeks. What was that? Just to help, the candidates understand that, yes, this is when you start.
Yeah, and in terms of school research, I think I did maybe about a quarter or 2 quarters amount of work in terms of just making my list of schools, simply because I knew I had to speak to current students. There are people who are in the MBA who are very busy themselves. They would take time to respond. Like I said, I didn't have a network in Europe, so it takes longer for me to actually look at career outcomes and how people. So I had to really rely on the students at the school. So I gave myself about 6 months maybe to just sample out different schools, speak to different people. So if I was targeting a September application deadline, somewhere like maybe like Feb, March is when I started reaching out to people. I also used Feb, March as sort of like a deadline because in a lot of the schools, they've maybe gone through a little bit of the interview prep for the internships. They've already in that recruiting cycle, so they also have a sense of what it looks like. So that timeline also helps. Some of them already have an offer. They know what it looks like. That also helps in that sense. So typically at least a 3-month window before the application deadline, September is what I started focusing on in terms of reaching out to people and figuring out what to do.
Got it. Makes sense. So, Badi, what's about you? What made you choose INSEAD, think about INSEAD, making an application to INSEAD? I know you were big on INSEAD when we first spoke, so it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, I kind of worked backwards. I saw what career I wanted and where I wanted to work. And for me, it was I wanted to move to the Middle East, especially given that I speak the language. And I was kind of tiptoeing between staying in finance or pivoting to consulting. So I spoke with a number of people in the industry in that region, and they kind of sold me on the consulting lifestyle. And then from there, I kind of assessed, okay, which school has the best placement in the Middle East? And yeah, it was INSEAD. So this whole top make the decision. Similar to Chris, I've lived in Europe my whole life, and I wanted to go to the Middle East and not vice versa. So everyone kind of has their own story. Everyone has their own motivations, and it's all about finding the best school that fits your goals and what you want to get out of it. So that was after speaking with alumni and speaking with there's one INSEAD alum that I kind of knew from undergrad. He was a few years ahead of me. Reached out to him, and he had nothing but good things to say about the course. So that was like the final. I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And thankfully, as like it was too late for me to apply for the July intake or the August intake. But it was probably better for me to do the January intake since there's the internship opportunity. And since I'm trying to make a career switch, that probably is quite important. So yeah, a lot of soul searching, a lot of, questioning what you actually want to do. I don't think someone should just pick a school just because they like the school or they think it's prestigious or reputable. You have to kind of know what you want to get out of it and kind of find the school that kind of best meets your needs, which is very important, that sense of direction. So for me, yeah, to pivot to the Middle East in consulting, INSEAD was the go-to.
Absolutely. Thanks for the insights, Badi. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen while we were talking about schools and the in-depth, the soul searching and the journey that Badi you took. And everybody has been talking about, Krish has been talking about how should you speak to the alums, to the students, get to know the schools better. So what you see on my screen is an ideal journey of an applicant with MBA and Beyond. What I want to highlight is that school selection actually happens at step 6. If you see, it happens much later. So before that, there's something which is going to be the most introspective part of your journey with MBA and Beyond, and it's going to be something that we try to call content gathering. It's also something, this portal is called Mirror for us because it shows you. It shows you who you really are, what your goals are, what you really want to do in life, why should you be doing it. So you read a lot of samples around it. You try to understand what kind of a pivot are you looking for with an MBA, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what your achievements are. And once you've done all of that, and 80% of the candidates who work with MBA and Beyond, they really do not 100% know which school they want to go to or apply to. They do have some sense of understanding that, hey, I see myself in INSEAD, but I want to understand myself better so that I can understand the schools better where I will fit in the best. So it's like it's you have to see your school like a marriage or a union happening between two, values or foundations, because schools are looking for much more than your resume. And so are you. You are trying to get the most out of a school. You're just not trying to land yourself into a certain job, but there's a lot of other layers to it, which Krish and Badi talked about. There's community, there's kind of people. Do you resonate with them or not? Is the curriculum making sense to you or not? Are you trying to go into a more academic, direction with respect to, or you want it to be more practical while you're imbibing everything and also applying at the same time somewhere? Do you want a longer internship? Do you want a shorter internship? Do you want a 2-year program or a 1-year program? So that all has to be answered first before you start talking about what school is really something that you will pick. And then from that list, of course, you go you try to filter it out by talking to a lot of alums, by talking to a lot of admissions committees, trying to understand whether it is a perfect fit for you or not. And it's a lot of work. It has to happen after you know answers to questions that you want to answer with an MBA. And after that, the work of finding the right school will start. So if you're targeting round 1, and please don't mind me if I'm going to dishearten you, if you do not know the schools that you're trying to apply to, I will honestly say you are late. So you can, and be easy on yourself, push your plans to round 2 and do that exercise now. Start thinking about where you're at in your journey. Start thinking about what you really would like to do with an MBA. Do you already have the perfect score that you're looking for? So Krish, Badi, would you like to help me and maybe the audience understand, when you started researching on the schools, were you ready with the GMAT score and the perfect resume that you wanted to send out to a school, or was it just something happening on the side constantly? There's something that, because people try to think in, sequence, there's no parallelism. Oh, I have to take my GMAT first and I have to do the school research after. So where were you at? Anyone can.
I think for me, it kind of wasn't really simultaneously, but it was in the sense, a GMAT is a big factor on which schools are relatively realistic to target. But for me, it's like when I'm pondering and I'm doing my research and reading online and figuring out like what I want to do, and as you mentioned, the early steps of kind of just knowing what you actually want to do. That almost happened a bit before the GMAT, but then I finally just said, all right, I have to start. Can't stop dreaming and start doing. And then I started the GMAT, and then always, for me personally, I thought the GMAT would be much easier, but it did require considerable amount of work. I definitely underestimated it going in. So, while you're studying, then you're in that mind frames, like you're studying to apply to business schools. So you're thinking about which schools you want to apply to, and, your mind's always racing. So it happened in parallel towards the end. And then, yeah.
Got it. Krish, how was it with you?
Yeah. Same here. I remember, I think I wrote my GMAT. So I had a score, but I wasn't happy with it. So I knew I had to improve my GMAT score. And I wrote my GMAT sometime in September, I think the 9th or 10th of September. So it's not something that I had a front, I just knew in a very broad perspective, these could be the schools that make good fit for me. And these could be schools where I would be a good fit as well. And I think the GMAT was maybe what helped me fine tune that list a bit, right? So I did not have a GMAT. I didn't have a resume up front. My resume was a 2-pager, not the kind of MBA resume that schools are looking for. But I think like what you just said, Parvi, I think a lot of the legwork upfront helps, right? Be it some research you can do in terms of finding out what on a broader level what the schools look like, maybe speaking to a few people, and at least penning down some of these thoughts. I think that was something that I knew I had to do because I knew what the questions would look like, right? You have a general sense of what the essays are. So that's maybe some of the legwork I was doing up front. But no, GMAT prep is something that definitely went on for much longer than I would have liked it to.
Got it. And it's very interesting to hear, like when you're open to when you're agile about the whole process as well. Because right now we're working with a lot of candidates, and I was talking to this candidate this morning. She doesn't have the best GMAT score. She has like a 680, but she's trying to get to a 720, 730. So she has like parked a bunch of schools in both the ranges, like which is sub 700 and of course more 720, 730 range as well. She's getting ready with an application where she is sure to get with a 680 while she's reappearing for her GMAT, and she's happy to push her application to round 2. If she gets the score in, she's happy to wrap up at least one application, send it out. So having that kind of flexibility and openness, at least between round 1 and round 2 definitely helps, because there's not much difference in the acceptance rate for both the rounds, at least. So and I really appreciate people go above and beyond, to reappear for GMAT and GRE. Sometimes, like one candidate I've seen, she did it 8 times in 8 months until she actually got the best score for herself, which of course backed her a big scholarship too. So even if like people are eyeing scholarships, I think it never really hurts to reappear. I understand it costs us money, but it's an investment. Like, look at it as an investment. If you are really going to bag a good 30, 40, 50% scholarship, so might as well just take a shot at it. So
yeah, I agree. I fully agree. I think in terms of R1, R2, I've experienced similar success rates myself with the same GMAT. I think having a sense of comfort in narrating essays once you have those minimum benchmark GMAT is what you need to do.
Yeah.
I think R1, R2, even when I've spoken to my friends and peers and AdCom directors at the school, they see R1, R2 as the important rounds where they get a good bunch of candidates and you have a good success rate. Beyond that is typically when they know these are people who are much later into the journey. They're putting a last minute application. The quality of the application also falls off. So that's what even I've heard at the school, that R1, R2 is typically where people have a good chance.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to and guys, feel free to drop in your questions if you have. I've received one in my personal, but you can put it out there. It'll help everyone. What was the most grueling and difficult part of your MBA application journey? Krish, Badi, anyone can go.
Badi, do you want to start? I'm going to think over it.
Yeah.
You have to go back in time.
It's a tough question.
Go ahead.
Honestly, when I was prepping for the GMAT, I thought I was like, just as long as I get a score that I like, the rest of the application process would be straightforward. I was like, just let me get the score that I need. So initially I thought it was the GMAT, but personally in hindsight, I wouldn't really call it grueling, but it's definitely, it's actually the essay writing, because it's just, you need a lot of reflection, introspection. You need to really dig deep, and you write an essay down. You're like, oh, that doesn't sound too well. Maybe I talk about this topic. Maybe I talk about that topic, and you're never happy with it. Even when you put it on a page, you're never happy with it. I had, thankfully, Andy from MBA Beyond. I had a lot of chats with him, and he was like a sanity check where he would confirm my feelings, like, okay, that's not a good essay. Let's see your other draft, or let's see your other version. And I was like, okay, thanks. I'm not crazy. It's just, so there is, for me, especially coming from a quantitative background, essay writing and kind of, trying to like have a storytelling on a piece of paper in 300 words. It's not really my strength. So it was nice kind of having that crutch that I can lean on and kind of get advice from. Yeah, it's definitely more work than what you see on the surface. You know, when you see an essay and you're like, oh, that's straightforward, I can answer that. But, you know, the more you think about it, the harder it gets, and you're probably never going to be happy with your essays. So it's very hard to kind of, you know, work on that. So me personally, it's definitely that part.
Yeah. So, and I think like an application, which is essay largely, I feel it's the most underrated, you know, in the mind's eye of an applicant when they're working out their GMAT and GRE. Having spoken to so many applicants, and when they get to that thing where there's so much introspection, so much thinking needed, and so much clarity needed with respect to what you want to achieve and the collinearity, it's not like a week's job or like say a 10 days job. It's a lot of, you know, like reprocessing your thought until you arrive, and you'll never be satisfied, like you said, Buddy. Like I've never seen a consultant and an applicant, despite having the success rate that we have, when they say we are 100% happy and satisfied, we have to say we are the most satisfied that we can be in the time span that we have, whether it's a year, it's a month, or it's 10 days. And this is the best foot forward that we could put. We cannot do better than this because the deadline is tomorrow. So we have to push the submit button. So I do agree with you, and I feel these sessions are resonance of the fact that I really want candidates not to undermine or underrate the essay journey or the application journey, you know, and only put months and months on GRE and GMAT. While I understand that's important and that we should, but it is possible to start thinking about your applications alongside as well if you're really going to apply, you know, you're going to apply this year or the year after. Krish, do you have any other thoughts or maybe other points which you think you found most grueling or no?
I think it's very similar, to be honest. I think, you know, there's this problem of you have about 500 words per essay and about 3 essays. There's a question of, am I really reducing myself to just 1,500 words or 2,000 words? So then it becomes, you know, one, how do you put yourself in the best foot forward? Because you want to show the value you can bring to the classroom. And there's always that self-doubt, right? Am I doing the best to put myself forward? Is this the best version of me? So you never can be satisfied because you think you're a much better candidate deep inside, and you want to try your best to make yourself stand out. So that's always a question that keeps coming in your head. The second thing I think for me is, I knew I could write. I think that's something I've been somewhat decent at, but I think writing for an MBA essay is a different task altogether, especially because you only have 1,500 words or 2,000 words. You need to be more direct. You know, quite often, I think everyone, when they start writing, you're a bit emotionally attached to the essay. That isn't always helpful. How do you remove that element of being too caught up with your own stories? And how do you, you know, make sure you're being direct and to the point and bringing out facts that really matter is a part of the task as well. So how do you do that? That I think those 2 elements were the biggest part. But apart from that, it's just managing expectation at work and application, right? It's just like living 2 lives, right? Like you're having your job, which you're doing for about 10 to 12 hours, and then you're doing another 3 hours of application prep. So how do you manage that expectation? I think I got lucky there. My people at my work were quite understanding that I want to invest in education. They helped me a bit here and there with timelines and projects. That was helpful for me, at least in the application cycle. But it's mostly, how do you make use of the real estate you have, right, in terms of essays? You have very limited space. Are you bringing out the best stories? Are you bringing out facts that really set you apart as a candidate? Like Buddy said, you need someone to sort of, you know, throw ideas, bounce it off, and then see if that's what sticks, right? And that's where you'd help, and that's what I started with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that brings me to, I should share like a poll, and it'll be interesting to see what people actually expect out of, you know, when they work with an admissions consultant, when they're trying to actually put in or invest that kind of money. I'm just going to present my screen. So I just framed this question because it'll be interesting to learn from the audience after what Krish and Buddy you shared, to understand the expectations. You know, what is that we are hoping an admissions consultant would do in our journey, and let's see if we can find answers to that. If you guys have a certain set of expectations, and if we know there is an ideal consultant that actually exists out there. So it'll be interesting to understand from you guys. We're taking a pause for a bit, and meanwhile, I think we have a question from Shaurya. So Shaurya is checking in with a question, Krish and Buddy. He's asking, I'm considering giving GRE instead of GMAT. Would it make any difference in my application? Context is targeting round 2 and planning to give it by November end. Scored 316 in the pre-preparational official marks. Thoughts on that, Krish? Buddy, do you have any thoughts on GRE versus GMAT? We get asked that all the time.
Yeah, I get asked this question even the profile evaluation calls. I think at this point, schools don't really differentiate. That's what I've heard at the school, at the events that I've had as well. Because the school sees it as a fit of academic aptitude, right? And as long as you're scoring, they understand the tests are of different format, very different, formats altogether, and you might see better fit in one format over the other. And largely, they're looking for aptitude in terms of quant and verbal skills to be able to contribute academically in the classroom. So I don't think schools differentiate. A good score obviously depends on, your candidate pool, what your profile looks like. That's a different question. So I won't answer to the 316 part. But as far as I've heard, schools don't differentiate anymore in terms of GRE or GMAT.
Got it. And Buddy, do you have any differing thoughts, or you would, yeah?
I know I totally agree with Krish. From the school's perspective, I don't think they treat either exam differently. I would say, the structure of the test it's slightly different, and even the subsections. I did GMAT. I haven't really seen the GRE, but from what I know, they are slightly different. So pick the one that plays your strengths. What a few people told me to do was take a GMAT mock, take a GRE mock, and then you can kind of tell which one you kind of are leaning towards. And if you think you'll do better on the GRE or GMAT, then pick the one that's better for you. Yeah, that'll be my only thing.
Absolutely.
But from schools,
I would second what Buddy you just said, because when people are choosing one exam over the other, it's best to do both the mocks and see where you're leaning towards. There is no differentiation. We've not seen any differentiation from, in the eyes of schools for one exam over the other. Absolutely none. We've seen equal amount of success rates for GRE scores as well as GMAT scores. In fact, GMAT GRE is going to hold only 15 to 20% of the weight to your application. Having said that, it's good. You need to strive to get the best score possible in your capability, but let that not limit your, what we were talking about in the previous, thought that an application has to be given equal importance, or maybe even more, slightly more, because that really holds a good amount of weightage on your application. Buddy, do you want to share what your GMAT, GRE, if you're comfortable, of course, what your GMAT score was?
Yeah, I applied with a 730 GMAT. I wanted to retake it and try and improve, but I was told that it was good enough. Clearly it was good enough, so it gave me more time to focus on my application.
I know why that is. Like we just before you got an admit, and like a month before that, somebody with a 630 got an admit at INSEAD, and INSEAD has been like, they've been open about it, that they are wanting to explore candidates beyond the GMAT GRE scores as well. So that's happening. Krish, do you want to maybe, because you also come from a very overrepresented pool, what would that be? What was your score? If you're comfortable sharing again with the audience.
Yeah, for sure. I had a 710, and I applied to schools that would fall in that category. And I think for ESA, the average was, I think, 690 the year I applied. So I knew I had decent chances, and then that's how I went about it.
Yeah, I think you guys were in the safe zone. That's what we call, it's the safe zone of GMAT scores. It gets tricky if it's a little sub 700 for the schools that you guys apply to. then you have to really put in a lot of hard work to push off a very impressive application to convince outcomes. Nihal there is raising his hand. Nihal, please go ahead, unmute yourself. Feel free to ask your question while only two people dropped in the answer. Go ahead, Nihal.
Yes, I have two questions. So since we are discussing about scores, I wanted to know, how exactly did you identify the fit on the basis of the scores? For example, almost all schools kind of give you an average, right, for the 80% of the class, and they kind of leave the bottom 10 and the top 10%, of course. And do you target a school where your score is exactly at the ballpark of the average, or do you target a school where the average is less than the score that you got, or is it okay to even think about schools whose average is probably a bit higher than your score? And then of course we are talking about both the formats GMAT and GRE. That's question one. I'll move on to the next one later on. Yeah.
Krish, Buddy, anybody? Thoughts?
I don't think you should approach it that way, solely looking at GMAT in isolation. As it was mentioned, GMAT score is only 20% or 15% of your application. There's other factors you'll have to consider in terms of what the school is looking for. All of them look for leadership experience. Do you have robust examples of that? Do you think you can point at other things that collectively elevates your profile? Applying purely based on GMAT, I know it's an important factor, but it's not the only thing. So I think it's important to kind of target schools based on what you think you have a lot to offer, and you can look at alums on like LinkedIn and whatever, and you can see their career paths, and if you find similarities, you can speak to them and you can share your thoughts with them, and you can kind of assess based on fit and culture as well. And yeah, there's more to it than solely just looking at GMAT or GRE.
Yep, I fully agree. I think I've seen people with 760s at ESA and 650s at NCR. So the spectrum is really broad, right? So I think that's probably not the right process. And I would maybe just go back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is maybe a way to look at it is determine what fit is for you. Fit can be a couple of things. What skills do you bring to the table? What maybe do you lack, and how does the MBA program fit in? And what kind of, like what Badi said in the beginning, which is which kind of a geography are you targeting in terms of career outcomes? What kind of sectors are you targeting? What kind of industries are you targeting? That'll give you a list of programs. But the GMAT can be a bit of a fine-tuning element once you know that list, right? Like I wouldn't say GMAT is the single criteria. So GMAT gives you a sense of, I think I'm confident of putting an application. I might be not so confident, but I think I can really make my essay stand out. Or in certain cases, I know I need to focus on certain elements if I have a poor GMAT. So it gives you some level of a sense. And going back to what Parvi said, I think what I've heard from people again is GMAT is only 20% of the application. But again, there are elements where GMAT, at least to give you confidence to apply, could be seen as an entry barrier. So have a comfortable score range. It's a range, it's not a single number. And that's how I would look at it as well. It's not, that's not the way I would look at it. I think it's to start back from fit and then maybe layer in GMAT on top of your fit for the school.
Yeah, that's perfectly said and well said. And, did you also have, a target about, because sometimes when you have a dream school, the scores tend to be higher, right? That's when you focus on the profile to see if the other qualities like leadership and, other evidences can probably strengthen your application, right? Even though your score is a bit lower than the average.
Yeah, so Nihal, I'd like to first add just one point. Depends on the pool that you also belong to. So let's say, and I'm just adding that criteria here. While of course we can say we've seen people from overrepresented pool with a lesser score also landing in very competitive schools. primarily because they had done something that made them outshine, which is something that you're just talking about. There was something
right.
very unique in their profile, which completely resonated with what the school was looking for. For example, INSEAD is big on international experience, but there was a candidate who we once landed with a 670 from an overrepresented school with no international experience at INSEAD. Primary reason was he was big on contribution to the community, worked with the governments on certain, and that's the second value that these guys are looking at. So it did not matter to them because at a national level in India, he was working on a lot of governmental projects which were doing good to the society. So he was able to bring out immense amount of stories for contribution to the community. So there are ways to offset a low GMAT score. That's why we need to figure out what is the position that you want to, as a brand, you want to position yourself as in your stories. So we try to discover that with a low GMAT score, with a full awareness that it is possible we may or may not land in a dream business school when it comes to GMAT as an aspect, right? So that awareness and knowing that is, I mean, you don't want to apply to all the dream schools, guys. This is something I'm really laying out there, considering all the parameters where values, your unique stories that you're putting out the table and or putting out on the table, and your GMAT score. If you belong to an overrepresented pool, you need to be 20 points higher than the average. That's one math that I can tell you. Beyond that, there is no math to a GMAT. There's no math to it. Like we've seen low scorers make it to some of the top schools all the time.
In terms of GRE, how much would you say? Like 4 or 5 points higher than average?
I think Nihal is like really, really. Okay. If you belong to an overrepresented pool, yes, 5 points.
I'm just trying to get the best
I don't
information.
want to quote this. I don't want to quote this because we have seen people with lesser scores also make it through. So best would be you hedge your bets, because pick a few schools, pick schools that resonate with you, which fall in the safe range for the GMAT or GRE score that you've gotten now. If you're reappearing and whatever you are at with your mocks, try to pick a few schools there, then get a few realistic schools which are where the average is a little lesser than what you have, and a few safe schools. Try to do that. And of course, try to map them, because sometimes a realistic school can also be a safe school for you if you have the stories that match with the value system of that school. So do look into the school, talk to the alums of the schools, try to get more perspective and see if it is resonating with you and you have stories to tell to that school beyond a score.
Perfect. I have one question, but I'll park that for probably others to pitch in and then go in later.
Yeah. Krish, I think you have some point to make too.
I just want to build on what you just said. Like, I think schools kind of understand that, let's say someone has been working in social impact. Schools understand that you have a professional life that is already taxing and you're already trying to impact out in the real world, right? And they understand, regardless of which sector you come from, that you have a real life that takes a toll on your regular day-to-day life. So they understand that the academic part, most of the candidates applying to European schools are applying well into their 5 years into their career. So you might be a bit rusty, you have professional, needs, you have personal life that goes on. They understand that you are a real person, not just a score. I just want to layer that in because they're quite aware that, especially like you said, someone is working in the social sector, they might be working in a remote place, they might not have the same access to tools and systems to give a proper GMAT like a regular candidate working in a mainstream city, right? They might not have the time, they might not have the liberty, they might not have the luxury of having all of the tools at their disposal. So schools understand those constraints that students and applicants have, which is why the stories really matter. And in the outcomes are very clear that this like what you said, Parati, the pool matters, and then it's the stories that matter, right? So you need to have good stories that really make you stand out.
Absolutely. Nihal, I'm gonna hold you for your second question so we can take Sanket's question first. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, Sanket's asking, how challenging is the journey for a second MBA applicant, especially for applicant who comes from an overrepresented community? I'd love to hear. Maybe Badi, you might not have so much context on it, but Krish, you might. A lot of candidates from India, they tend to go for a second MBA, international MBA, because in India we tend to go for our first MBA immediately after our undergrad, we go to IM, ISB, or not ISB, but IMs potentially, and then they really want to do something else after a couple of years. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you had peers who did that? So yeah.
I do actually. One of my closest friends who's from India, the MBA, was a second MBA applicant, had about 9 years of experience, I think, after the MBA. So it's somewhat common, I think. But what I noticed is that's where you clearly need to articulate what is a second MBA giving to you, right? For most of these people, it might be a professional network, it might be a geographical mobility, or it's an industry change that they otherwise not able to do with the first MBA, right? And it's important to highlight how does that MBA help you do that, and equally also ensure that you have certain skills which you can bring because of the virtue of the work and the first MBA you already have. So the sense that I got from talking to my friend was it was a lot about positioning. He already had his family, he has a kid as well. So for him, the goal was to move to Europe, use his second MBA to transition from, I think, industry to consulting. The first MBA wasn't really helping him do that because he's already been in a specific sector for years after the first MBA. And this was the only way for him to make that move happen. So I think it's really articulating how that MBA fits in and why that second MBA really, really matters. I think that's where the cake really is, right? Making sure you're really able to articulate the value of the second MBA. I think that's the challenging part, but if you're able to highlight that very well, then position your story as compared to the other first-time MBA candidates, I think you have a very good chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd second that. First, it's definitely to why MBA, the answer that you have to arrive at. One challenging thing that Sanket, people with second MBA, they have to articulate an answer for why second MBA as well. So there are multiple ways. I can give you a hint on how usually candidates try to approach this. They try to portray their first MBA as, masters in management somehow, because that's really what it looks like if you're going right after an undergrad and you've not accumulated any experience, which in an ideal world, in international or global MBA world, they don't understand. How can you go for an MBA right after undergrad? I mean, it requires you to have experience, some function, some industry, some understanding of what it means to be in a corporate space, and then hopping onto an MBA journey, because MBA has a purpose. It has a purpose either to pivot or to mold you into a leader where you actually are, to climb up the ladder, whatever, and that you cannot do until you experience it. So there are ways to position your story with a strong why second MBA, and people do it all the time. So it is okay as long as you have the right answers to the questions that even Krish highlighted. I think we can take up Nihal's question next, and then Shaurya, we'll come to your question. I think that'll be it. Unless you guys have any more questions, please feel free to drop them. We have 8 more minutes to go. Nihal, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
So my second question was, I'm in the content gathering stage, and I was kind of identifying my weaknesses. Now, that's the most challenging part, because we know how to brag about ourselves, but talking about our weakness is the most difficult part of it. I wanted to understand, how did you approach, while you were doing this, how did you approach around identifying those weaknesses, how you did it, and whether the STAR approach works for, almost all the things that you do in content gathering, or it's only for specific cases like strengths or something else?
Yeah, guys, just to give some context, and before Badi, you can answer that. And I'm sure that's a tricky one because everybody faces that, where I'm sure like a consultant will also be helping you there. But weaknesses is a section in our content gathering phase at MBA Beyond, which a lot of candidates, not just you, Nihal, people find challenging. So Badi, go ahead. Maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I kind of giggled there because it was definitely something that I struggled with to kind of think of. Not saying that I'm a perfect person, it's just kind of coming up with something tangible. So my strategy was I kind of thought back and just looked at any mistakes I've made in my professional career, my personal life, and then figuring out what I did to cause that. Once I reframed it that way, where I found examples and then I kind of identified the root cause, it made it a bit easier. So yeah, just basically think back at any examples of incidents that kept you up at night, and figure out like what was the reason behind that, and whether, you know, a project failed and then you realize that you were, you know, overworking and, you know, over promising, or, you know, something like that. But yeah, sometimes you just kind of have to frame it a different way to kind of unlock the memories. So that kind of helped.
Yeah. So Nihal, I'll just top that up, and thanks for that, buddy. That's exactly what I would have also said, and like looking at those so many applications myself. It's going to come naturally to you, Nihal. You can be honest. Just try to be as honest when you're thinking in the content gathering phase. Don't think that you have to make up a story around, you know, pleasing an adcom for now. That will happen later. Don't worry about it. So right now, you just be honest. For example, a lot of candidates, especially the ones who come with 3 to 4 years of experience, and I'm being honest, like they have a challenge, and this is very common. They have an issue with delegating tasks. And that is a weakness. It's fine. And how they overcome that, so that, because delegating is something that is going to be essential for you if you're going to become a leader. So if it's a weakness that's actually that has required for you to do some work on, to mold yourself into a place that also positions you with respect to leadership that business schools expect of you. So right now, just dump everything that's coming in your head. Later, you will try to bind that or connect that, you know, with collinearity, what school is expecting. You will be able to pick the right weakness for yourself. Krish, do you have any thoughts on the weaknesses, strengths, anything? Yeah. Any
Same
thoughts?
thing. I think just, you know, writing down projects that did not work well for you. There's always a root cause there. The other thing that I also did was, I think if you have a good relationship with your manager or a peer or someone who's slightly above you who might be your recommender, having a candid conversation with them also helps. They might be able to give you feedback. And secondly, I use that conversation as a precursor to tell them, oh, well, you know, why don't you help me out with a letter of recommendation as well? You know, that was a good sort of a opener into, you know, making them the recommender for me eventually. So they had some points. I jotted down those points as well, and I took the points that I had and that, you know, saw what made sense, and I put them as weaknesses. But you could also ask a manager or maybe a counterpart that you think might be referring you or recommending for you later on. That will also help.
Absolutely. And Nihal, if you haven't used that tool yet, I'm not sure where you are at in your journey, you can ask your app buddy to make your 3 references bit. So MBA Beyond allows you to collect references and information inputs from 3 people in your life who know you in and out. And that's one, it could be personal, the other one is professional, and the third one could be either one of them.
Right.
At one point, and there was a candidate we worked with last year, she actually collected her feedback on strengths and weaknesses from, I think, 11 to 12 people. Because she wasn't able to think of it by herself, she was like, what Krish just said, like, I'm going to ask others to give me that feedback. And that really populated her application very beautifully. So you could do that exercise for yourself as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Let's go on to, we have 3 minutes, guys. Any other questions you'll ever have later, even after the session, please feel free to drop me an email. I'd be happy to answer. Shaurya asks, I have straight DS in all 5 math related courses in undergrad. Okay. I still was the gold medalist of my branch. Congratulations. That's amazing. Do I need to do any supplemental math courses with good grades to help improve my application? I think you just wanted to like really highlight I was a gold medalist, but good to know that, Shaurya. You're already standing out. Krish, buddy, do you want to give your thoughts, inputs to Shaurya?
I think, I mean, my sense is that the school is just checking for academic aptitude, right? GMAT is just a reflection of that, or the GRE is just a reflection of that. If you have great ACADS, you know, and great GMAT, great, happy days. If you have poor ACADS, maybe supplemented with the GMAT. If you have excel in ACADS, maybe GMAT can be okay, right? That's how I would answer that question. I don't know if the school gives any more importance than that, really. Because there are a lot of people who are in the same score range. They're looking for stories and positioning, right? And fit. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, I'd say the same. Badi, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was in the bucket of low GPA. Therefore, I needed a high GMAT, and you need to reassure the admission committee that you can handle the quant work. I think, yeah, a high quant score in GMAT will alleviate any concerns from the committee's perspective. So if you think you can, get a good quant score, put in a decent application, there's probably no need. But, if you have time, you're not in any rush, and you're, time-wise and financially, you're able to take the course, then no harm. It might help. I don't know. Like, you need to see the rest of the profile to actually understand whether it helps or not. But yeah, as I said, a high quant score in GMAT will probably offset any poor maths grades, from whatever amount of years ago. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And so, guys, having talked so much about GMAT and everything, I'd like to give some closing thoughts. We've seen somebody with really good GMAT, like a 9-pointer in India, coming from IIT with a 770 GMAT, not making it through a top school, while we've also seen a low GPA and a low GMAT GRE as low as 630, making it to Wharton and INSEAD. So it's like there's no perfect application ever. Like, you will always have flaws. You could have the best course, but there could be something that you might really be missing in your application that business schools are looking for. It's about figuring out what the school is looking for, and are you really projecting that? If you're just going to be an overrepresented fool and say that, hey, I just want to be a management consultant because I care about my career, business schools don't care. They really want to see impactful leaders in you. So bring that out, irrespective of the score. Try to take the best shot. Let's see where you land, and keep your expectations very realistic. Don't just apply to all the dream schools. I think it was a great session, Krishan and Badi. Thanks for the insights that you shared with the audience today. And I hope you enjoyed the session, guys, everyone. Your feedback really matters. So you'll be hearing from us soon. And I hope, Krishan, Badi, you also enjoyed the session with the audience today.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely meeting you all.
Thanks,
See you.
guys.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.